Only practice makes perfect, and that's of course also the case for Angular. That's why in this section here, we'll build another brand new demo project, an investment calculator where users can enter their initial investment amount, then their expected annual investment rate, their expected return, and the duration, and then as a result see how their investment is expected to develop. But of course, this section is not primarily about this app, even though it's a nice demo app, but instead it's about applying the knowledge you gained thus far and about practicing what you learned. It's about practicing all those Angular essentials. And therefore this section now is a nice exercise where we will build this investment calculator by adding a header component with a title and an image, by adding a user input component that collects user input with two-way binding, and by adding an investment results component that will output the results in a table. And you can definitely try building this application on your own first, before then following along with me over the next lectures where we will build this together. You can try this on your own first, and you can use signals or not. You can use standalone components or module-based components. I will show you all different approaches in this section. You can use a service or not. You can solve this exercise in any way you want, but of course it will be challenging. So if you're not able to solve it, that's also absolutely fine. We're just getting started here, and you can simply take this section as an extra opportunity to follow along with my solution and follow my explanations. And you can also always pause my explanations and only try out the next steps on your own. If you want to tackle the entire exercise, that's of course great, but you should then also absolutely have a look at the next lecture first, since that lecture will include some helpful hints that you should absolutely keep in mind. Now, attached to this lecture, you find a brand new starting project, which you should use, since in there I, for example, prepared this investment results TypeScript file, which you most likely won't use like that, but which contains some code that you might need to tweak a bit. As you see right now, it gets some errors, but which you could use as a starting point to use that user input and derive those annual results, the data that should be output in a table. You don't have to use that file, but I will use it in my solution, and it is simply there to help you focus on the Angular part so that you don't need to figure out how you can calculate the accumulated interest and so on, because that's not what this exercise is about. It is, of course, about the Angular part. So that's the starting project, and I got two important notes regarding that starting project. For one, you'll notice that it has a public folder and no src assets folder. It's that public folder that contains the image that must be used in the header, for example. And if you want to use that image, there's one important difference compared to how you loaded it from the assets folder. If you want to use an image from the public folder, you don't put public into your image path. Instead, you immediately put your image file name here, whatever that file name may be. And that will then load it. So files stored in that public folder are referenced like this without adding public / in front of them. That's one important hint, one important thing to be aware of. Other than that, you can load and include the image as you learned it. The other important thing, if you're trying to solve this exercise on your own, is that you'll need to build a couple of components, and in order to save you the hassle of writing your own style files attached to this lecture, you actually find those prepared component style files, which you can use for your component, so that you don't have to write the CSS code on your own. Of course, you then also may want to have a look at this CSS code to see which classes and elements are used there to structure your component markup accordingly. Though ultimately, it's of course not too important that you get the styling right. You should just try to build some investment calculator application. So that's the starting project. In order to use it, you should run npm install in that attached folder once you downloaded it, so that you install all dependencies. And then with that out of the way, npm start to start the development server. Now you can try building this application on your own. Starting with the next lecture, we'll build it together. So let's now build this application together and let's solve this exercise together. By the way, if you were not able to do this on your own, that's no problem. We're just getting started. It's the second application you're building. It's totally normal if you're not able to complete it on your own yet. You'll get more practice throughout the rest of this course and you'll get plenty of useful knowledge out of this section. Let's simply build it together now. And I want to start with that first task here. I want to add that header component to my application. And therefore, in the app folder, we can add a new header folder where we can add those component files. Or alternatively, we don't do that. And instead, in a new terminal window, we use the Angular CLI to add that header component. With the ng-gc command to generate a new component. And I'll name that component header, and I'll add the --skip-tests flag so that this extra testing file isn't generated, because I don't need that. With that, I got my header folder here with the header component files, and it automatically created a standalone component for me here. And I'll start by using standalone components, but later at the end of this section, I'll migrate it all to module-based components so that you also see how you could use modules instead of standalone components. Now, I will actually not change anything in that header TS file though. Instead, I'll jump to the header component HTML file because it's in there where I now want to add the header element. Like this. And then in there, I want to have an H1 element where I say investment calculator. And above that, I want to have an image like this. And here for the source, it's now important to recognize that the image is actually now in the public folder. It's this investment calculator logo PNG file. And you can actually just add it like this and add the extension without adding public / at the beginning, and also not by adding assets / at the beginning, because it isn't in an assets folder, and whilst it is in a public folder, this folder and the files inside of it are actually loaded slightly differently so that you can and should omit the public path here and just directly reference the files and folders inside of the public folder. So in this case, the image that's stored inside of the public folder. And then we should also add some alt text here like money back, because that's in the end what's visible on this image. So that's the markup. We also need some styling, and that's why I attached some component style files earlier in this section. But attached, you again find the header component.css file, and you can simply replace your header component CSS file with the attached one. Well, and with that, we got the markup, we got the styles, and we don't need any special TypeScript logic. And we can therefore go back to the app component HTML file. And in there, you can now replace this H1 element with app-header. And you can add that as a self-closing tag like this. Though, as you see, this will give us an error that it's not a known element, because by default, as you learned, Angular doesn't scan your project for possible components. So in order to make Angular aware of a component here, you have to add it to this imports array in the app component TypeScript file. So here I'll add this imports array in my app component selector, and I will import the header component from ./header/header.component, and then also add it here to imports. Alternatively, if I remove that, we could of course also have used our IDE support and we could have chosen that quick fix here, which Visual Studio Code suggested to me. This also adds this import and adds it here to this imports array. And with that, if you go back to localhost 4200, you should now see your header here on the screen, the title and the image. And that's the first step completed already, though of course, arguably the remaining steps will take up more time.